Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads for our review and reaction of episode 7 of The Acolyte Choice. We are going to talk about everything that happened in this episode. This was our next flashback episode. Lots of big reveals, a lot of things happen that connect the dots between the past timeline and the present day timeline. So if you don't want to be spoiled, make sure you've watched the episode before you watch this. For those of you who are thinking about doing that, we'll be going for about 2 hours here, taking your questions, your comments, your theories, your predictions for the finale next week. All of the stuff related to episode 7 and then next week's episode 8 of the Acolyte. So go watch the episode, come back, and then you can discuss the show with us. And if you're watching on replay, join us every week. We do this every week talking about the Acolyte, and we will continue doing this type of show after the Acolyte is over, where we'll be taking your guys' questions, comments, talking about the news and all sorts of things related to Star Wars. So join us next week for the finale of The Acolyte, and then keep coming back for that show as well. So hopefully you guys either enjoyed it or have some interesting takes on The Acolyte episode 7. I'm going to pass it over here to Sonic for his review first, and then we'll get to mine, then we'll get to your guys' questions.
Yeah, I think from a technical standpoint, this was a little sloppy editing wise. I think that's been one of my biggest critiques for this show. There is just very rapid cuts for everything, and especially in this episode where I kind of wanted things to breathe a little bit, especially with the Jedi. It would also totally make sense for the Jedi to be calmer and just a bit more composed about what they're doing. Yeah, that wasn't there. And I mean, that's the nature of like working around these kid actors who had a lot to do in the third episode and taking the relevant plot from what's happening there, but also then saying, okay, well, this is what's happened, this was important, right? So yeah, the editing, not the biggest fan when it comes to this show. It doesn't really feel assured. It feels like everything has to be like put together to fit into a shorter time frame. And it feels strange to say that too, because when we see Ahsoka and Mando, they've had shorter episodes and they don't necessarily have insane amounts of content in some of these episodes. But like you look at like episode 2 of Mando, it's a very short episode, but you feel like the tone really settle in. You see the characters take their time. Yes, there's action, but the walking, the plotting, like the fact that there's like moments of calm, I wanted more of that. And look, I will say the Jedi started off a little calmer and nicer. It's just once the action picked up, it just accelerated a little too fast for me. I would have wanted a little bit more moments with the witches, obviously, too, to pad that out a bit. But the witches here get the least amount of time, right? And I know we got a lot of them in episode 3. And the Jedi, when we get to have stretches with them, I thought was very strong. It's just that once we cut to the witches and it's not in action, it's just rehashes. It's just a slightly different angle from like Soul or whoever, right? So yeah, not the fan of editing when it comes to this show. I think that really takes away from like trying to like seep yourself into the story, which is relatively short. That's just a fact. But as far as like what is there, I thought this was pretty solid. I think one of my fears after episode 3, which everyone was like in a riot about, is like, oh, we're totally ruining what was Anakin's special birth and all that. And even though we don't necessarily get every answer, I think what is here, the reasons for the Jedi being here, what the witches are doing, what exactly the twins are, and that's one of the things I've been harping on. They're not regular twins. There's a reason why they have like the same look and hairstyle. There's some things that just are unnatural about them. And I like that was all there. Like, and not to just say like, oh, my predictions turned out right, but it was nice to have that stuff. I especially appreciate any connections to the High Republic, which is the biggest initiative of Star Wars in canon. So starting off with the idea that this planet Brendok was one of the victims of the great disaster from Light of the Jedi. I'm always going to love that stuff. I like the idea that these destroyed planets could be where the Force can have these potential vergences that these Jedi are looking for, that in the chaos of destruction, kind of like how like a volcano, you think it's such a disrupted thing, but actually the soil that comes from the nutrients, everything that comes out of that is creating a life. Sometimes it's one of the most nutrient rich things to happen to an environment. So I like that idea that like these destroyed places, the Force can almost, the will of it, kind of come into play here. So that, I thought that was cool. Um, I did also appreciate the Kilnaka action, especially after not getting anything episode 4, right? Seeing him in action, seeing a little bit more about his character. And yes, no matter what, as much as we want to be like, let's get in the head of a Wookiee, we can't unless they have a translator droid, right? So I thought they used them fairly well. I thought the action was pretty strong. I enjoyed having Jedi use their lightsabers here. It wasn't just like a situation where it's like martial arts focused, like a lot of the show has been. Torben got to have some moments here. I really like that stuff. So seeing a Wookiee just completely outclass two humans, yeah, that's what we've known would happen, and I'm glad that happened here. That was pretty cool. And I think one of the bigger things that I was really interested about, and I feel like a lot of this finale will really focus on, is what exactly this witch's power is, right? Like I think that image of like them kind of like fading into mist and all. We've gotten versions of that with the Night Sisters, and shout out to Torben being like, "Oh, is it Night Sisters?" Like, no, it's similar but not the same. But seeing like Mother Anastasia kind of like almost flesh out, and then Coral later, like and there's something with May, like maybe that's what these abilities are. This is some strange ethereal magic power that they have, or it's something more to do with like maybe all of them are a little bit more artificial than we thought. Like I thought that was pretty interesting. Like the idea that maybe the Force could have just spawned these witches here is pretty fascinating to me. Like if it's all of them and it's not just these kids, and maybe what they're trying to do is concentrate all their power into the twins. Now we know now that they're not just identical twins. I mean, they never were. The actors are fraternal twins, quite obviously. But seeing that they are like matching up, we're going into that prequel thing of like, hey, now we can explain the Force with midichlorians. Here's like another way of like, oh, there's some symbiosis or something. They're exact one-to-one matches. So whatever is going to happen with May and Osha, I know in the predictions I said they're going to like link up together, stuff like that. But regardless, we know now that they're like a split being, which I think is going to be very fascinating. It's going to be very interesting to see what Kymer does to pull those strings. It's going to be very interesting to see what Soul does to May to like maybe unbalance her, just like Coral does in this episode, like really pull on all the negative qualities of that character. But really, I think the best part about this episode was seeing the different Jedi, what the remnants of High Republic philosophy are, what are the warning signs of prequel, especially younger Jedi, and like the general idea of like Jedi detachment. I think a lot of us, when we're looking at the character of Indara, especially since we don't get anything after that first episode, it's easy to be like, oh, she might have been like a Sith or something, or she's the one who caused all this trouble. And I was honestly believing that too until this episode plays out. She's detached. She's formal. She is the fault of the Jedi of like not really caring about the humans, people who are like, you're encountering and all that. But what was fascinating to me is that like she's not necessarily doing anything wrong here. She's following the High Council's orders. She's trying to do right by it. And her final thing to Soul is like, all of you, like Kanaka, not really, but Torben and Soul, you all put too much of your personal needs and your desires to the front here. Now is not the time to remove that final one. So she goes with this lie almost to May of all people of like, I wasn't really trying to do anything to you guys. This was not really my fault. But at the end of the day, I wanted to make sure your sister was going to have some existence, some connection, something to like keep her calm and stable for at least some time in the Jedi Order, even though we know we have that hint of Indara saying she doesn't really think that she should be continuing as a Jedi in those premiere episodes. So I thought Carrie Ann Moss actually delivered a very strong, subtle performance there. Torben, we got to see a lot more of like the possession, and I thought that was cool. And the selfishness of him of just wanting to go back to Coruscant, the idea that a lot more of these Jedi's kind of just want to be together, not necessarily out there like a High Republic Jedi were. I thought maybe not the most best, like well handled with the dialogue, but I did like that concept there. But Soul, Soul, it's sad because I feel for him. I think he is ultimately trying to do the right thing, and you can see his POVs. You can see why these things are going wrong, and the sad tragedy of Anase being like, no, I was gonna like ignore my coven and let her go with you. I wanted her to be happy, right? The tragedy that he keeps on running into these things, almost like an Anakin-esque character. Great intentions, right? He's not super angry and all. He's fearful, but that's the thing. He gives into his fear. He gives into his weaknesses, his flaws as a character, just because he wants to save Osha. And in the physical scene of him like holding up the two bridges, and then he has to choose OSHA, right? Because he's thrown everything into this case here of like, okay, well, if not her, then I'm not going to take either of them, right? And they're both at riskier, and it's sad, it's unfortunate, and I feel for the guy. I still think that there are some more ominous feelings about how that's twisted inside of him and turned him around. I'm not necessarily saying Sith or dark side or anything, but yeah, I feel for what he had to do because he kept on misreading situations. He kept on running into things, and he kept on trying to say, no, we should be better, more communicated, all this and that. And it's all none of these Jedi are on the same level of philosophy, right? We can say Coral and Anase are on two fronts, but you can kind of split that off with how the Coven kind of pairs off with Coral. But the Jedi here, none of them are on the same page, and you can see they're all very flawed. And now, I don't think the dialogue around all of them together was great. I thought this is probably Soul's weakest dialogue wise of all the episodes. But I did buy that relationship. I did buy the flaws that they all had. I did buy like being raised in this institution. Some of these things, kind of the weaknesses that they had, they weren't able to just talk it out like they would have maybe 100 years ago, right? And we're seeing flaws in these Jedi in the High Republic books too. Obviously, a lot better writing there, but I did get the idea that the struggles of what they've gone through over this tumultuous period while they're supposedly in their golden age and seeing the flaws of their institution, I did buy that, and I thought that was pretty well done. um, but yeah, and we're gonna have to see what the finale is gonna be like, what Kymer is gonna do, and the artificiality of these twins, right? I'm glad that there isn't anything terribly like, oh no, like there's something lore breaking about this. Now, how the Virgins was used by Honestly and all that, that's definitely gotta be answered too in the finale. I'm not gonna deny that, but I'm glad that we didn't get stuff introduced here that would just make me go like, I don't know how to like convince myself of this. So strongest things about the episode there, it's not going to be my favorite for sure. I mean, episode 5, and I'd argue even episode 2 I enjoyed more, but I think this is episode, if you see a fan edit splicing up 3 and 7, I think it could be a lot stronger.
That's a fair point. So as you guys, know, I haven't enjoyed this show that much, and this episode didn't really change that. So I know you guys prefer talking about lore and stuff like that over film techniques and structure and all that type of stuff, but just let me get that out of the way because the editing, like you said, wasn't very good. You also caught it before I could say it. My pet peeve, the pointless exposition scene of having everybody sit around a campfire and talk about nothing, that stuff that they should already know. They've been there for 6 weeks, and Torben's like, "Oh man, why are we here collecting plants? Like, we gotta go home." And they're like, "Now we'll reveal after 7 weeks all the stuff, the why we are here." That never came up before. Like, I think it's just stuff like that that just is mind-boggling with this with this show, that you have scenes like that. Just, like, somehow pace it out. I think this episode, one thing it did for me too was it made me want this to have been the first season, like, a season with Soul and Torben and Indara and Kelnaka as they are discovering this mystery. I think that would have paced it out way better, considering Soul is the most interesting character. I think you could have centered a whole season around Soul and had that evolution carry into a second season with May and Osha, and really revealed, oh my God, May's still alive. This whole thing, because this show hasn't really gone for any specific type of tone, right? First, it was a murder mystery. They axed the murder mystery after the third episode. So then now it's a big reveal of what happened with the fire. Well, this episode didn't change anything that happened with the fire. It's the same thing. The only thing we learn now is Soul killed their mom, but she turned into this giant black cloud of smoke. Like, I don't know what's he supposed to do there. Just use the force pusher away. I don't know. It didn't make me feel less attached to Soul. In fact, I kind of understand his reasonings now even more so than I felt like I did before. The Torben thing, I just felt like that character is so underbaked in this episode because he's been there for 7 weeks. He's been complaining the whole 7 weeks. there's nothing in the previous two episodes about Torben that makes you think he's somebody who just doesn't like to be out on missions. So why he's here? Just the only thing he has to do is complain to set the plot in motion, right? It doesn't really fit what we've seen with this character so far. And then if we're supposed to learn about this, then this is actually the driving force for the whole conflict. Maybe we should have had more time with Torben so we kind of understand that side of him instead of now in this episode. After 7 weeks, he's like, I'm done with this. Screw it. I'm going to get this kid. We're getting out of here. I'm disobeying my master. I just felt like a lot of character choices were typically with this show very paper thin. It was like, I'm doing this because the plot wants me to, and that's what I felt most disappointed with this episode. Was I really hoped this would give a lot of character. I hoped this would add more to these characters, add more to the layers of these characters, make us feel badly for Kelnaka, Indara, and Torben that they're dead. Soul, change our perspective of him. It didn't really do that for me in any way. So I was disappointed with that. And then secondly, I was most disappointed with how they handled May in this episode. May has turned into easily my least favorite character in the show. And I just don't understand how you have an opportunity here to at least kind of maybe solidify how the ascension ceremony or the magic or the way things play in her head has caused her decisions to be kind of scattered, or how does Mother Coral's influence kind of detract from the way her mother has tried to influence her towards the good? How does Coral's darker tendencies make her walk that line towards the dark? Here, basically, all you have is Coral being like, "Go, be angry," and then that's it. That's our motivation for how May goes to Osha and says, "I'm going to kill you." That's our motivation for how May starts this fire, which, as of now, we still a fire based on oil burning in a stone castle. Um, they can reveal stuff in the next episode. It's just still there seems like a lot of the things that you felt like, no, the show couldn't just leave that. It does, and they don't touch on it. And this episode again is 35 minutes or 36 minutes. Why can this not be a 45 or 50-minute episode? So I know you guys are probably tired of me complaining about all this stuff. It's just really frustrating. As somebody who wanted to love this show, I keep saying it. It was my second most anticipated show out of the 2020 announcements after Ahsoka. I wanted to love the show. I love the prequel era. I want this to be awesome, but I'm baffled by a lot of the decisions made in this show, especially in the explanations for it in this episode. And as for the future, right, the Virgins thing, I think it's better than obviously contradicting the Chosen One prophecy, because that would have been an all-time like mind-boggling decision, right? I didn't think anything could do that, um, contradict that. But we still have never seen a Virgins enacted by somebody or a group of people, right? So the closest thing we have seen, if we're correlating it, is Plagueis thinking he might have caused one when he creates or when he uses the Force to bring back Venemus in the novel, and he thinks he kind of created Anakin as a byproduct. But we don't have that confirmed, and he's not directly involved in like, here, I'm going to use a Virgins in the Force to create life. It's not, it doesn't go down like that. So in my head, it's like the closest thing is Snoke, his philosophy in The Force Awakens, where he's like, darkness rises, light to meet it. That's Last Jedi. But he says that in The Force Awakens, something akin to that too in his hologram. And I think there's going to be something like that at some point revealed in the show. I mean, I hope next week's a longer episode so that we really get under how Khmer is related to the witches. I don't think these witches are dead. We have Indara, who I thought very cool to get that scene where Indara single-handedly removes all those witches from Kelnaka's mind. Like, that shows how powerful she is. Makes me want even more of her. We're not going to get it, but it made me want even more of her. So that was cool. But those witches are all passed out. They're not dead. So unless they die in the explosion, they could come back and they could be related to Khmer. We see Coral disappear, and then she never comes back. She's not in that group of witches. I went back and rewatched it to make sure she's not in that crowd. She's not in that crowd. So after she kind of leads the possession of Kelnaka, she disappears and she goes and does something else. We don't know who rescued May and pulled her out. I think Coral more than ever is looking like somebody affiliated with Chimera, and how that's going to play out in the next episode, I think we'll start to bring full circle these two plots. I just think what they could have done here with character in so many ways, this was a massive letdown. I think everything character wise that they went for here didn't really land for me. And Soul's big reveal to May, like, I don't know what is it like. What's he had to be saving for 16 years to tell her that I dropped you? Is that she already hates him? Like, I don't think that's a big reveal, and he thought she died. So I don't know where that how that connects at all. I think he has big reveals to tell Osha, but I don't know what he has to tell May from this episode. May saw him kill their mother. Yeah, so that was another thing that I just didn't really understand what they were going for. I guess we'll see next week. And they did play the Kylo Ren theme one more time when they were fighting Kelnaka. They played a few notes from Kylo Ren's theme. How is that connecting to the witches? We'll see how that plays out a little later. I did like the possession of Torben scene though. I liked getting underneath the magic of these wishes, seeing how it plays out in these characters' heads. Torbins are obviously pretty weak-minded to be possessed by a desire to go home. I thought when she says, like, you have desires too outside of just being a Jedi, I thought, okay, they're going to go into other layers of Torben, like what breaks down his entire character and who he is and what makes him tick outside of just wanting to go back to Coruscant. But that didn't happen. But I did appreciate seeing how the possession kind of works, how a Jedi would succumb to like suggestion under the powers of these witches. So I thought that was interesting. I did really appreciate that sequence. Trying to think of what else I wrote down in my notes. Let's see here. Uh, yeah, I just feel like the Jedi here. I love the connection back to Light of the Jedi. I do. But I wish there was another episode, or honestly, 45 minutes across the episodes, 30 minutes more in this episode to show the Jedi arriving on Brendok, show why it's so important for them to discover this virgins, show the Jedi Council meetings. Also, why are they letting Soul train Osha? This shouldn't really change anything. Is the midichlorian count going to be the thing that changes it? But in that case, they already knew the midichlorian count of these twins, and they still denied the training of them. It's the same way with Anakin and in the Phantom Menace. They deny him, but enough of the Jedi Council members believe he's the chosen one to where Yoda's the only one against it. And then they let Obi-Wan train him after Qui-Gon dies. But I don't really understand why they would let Soul train him here. They already seem kind of against Soul training him. Andara's like, that's why you don't have a Padawan, because you're too impulsive. You speak too much from your heart. So I thought part of the reason they deny training Osha is because of Soul's attachments. Well, why would they let him train her now? I don't understand what would change for the council. This seems pretty fickle. There's just so many things that just, if you gave us a couple more scenes, maybe they go back to Coruscant. Soul talks to the Jedi Council. They are like, hey, you went through this big trial and this big ordeal, and we feel now, after you went through this ordeal, that you are finally ready to take on a Padawan. Something, just anything. I'm asking for character beats, and I feel like we just don't have any character beats in the show. It just wants to keep moving, and I would get that in a thriller, but in a show that hasn't picked a tone, I don't know why at this point you wouldn't stop and just breathe. Let's just breathe in this episode. The last one was our longest episode, right? Our episode 3, the last flashback. I was hoping for an even longer episode this time, and I think I was frankly pretty disappointed with that. And I feel like there's so many other things in my head that I've wanted to talk about that a lot of them are going away. So hopefully they come back as we continue our discussion. So we'll get to your guys' chats now. But ultimately, I was pretty disappointed with this episode. I am relieved that it doesn't seem to directly contradict Chosen One prophecy. We'll see how they play that out. And I think it is an interesting idea. Maybe a pre-build, to the dyad. I think that's what they're trying to go to. How somebody can be split into two people and form, the yin yang thing we see in The Last Jedi. We see it again in Osha's book here in this episode, like we saw in episode 3. We're gonna have to touch on that a little later with Kelnaka's obsession with it. There's so many things, so many connections to the sequels that I think that's what they're going for, kind of a pre-setup to that dyad. But it's still how they handle the Vergence is going to be interesting. If they're saying it seems like they're wanting to say that the planet created these twins, but the show also makes you want to believe that it was Mother Anastasia because she literally says she did. So we'll see how they handle that. I think there's still a lot up in the air for me whether I will like the explanations of a lot of things they said here, but ultimately I would just say number one word for me with this week's episode was disappointed. I was disappointed that they didn't stick the landing on a lot of character beats that I was really hoping to see. But let us know what your guys' thoughts are. We already have comments piling up, so we will get to your comments now. Do you agree with me? Do you agree with Sonic? Do you disagree with either of us? Do you disagree with both of us? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. It will be first come, first serve as we get through all of these comments. And we start with the super chat from Toydarian Dan. Thank you so much, Toydarian Dan, who says, congratulations on 10,000 subscribers. Thank you guys so much. It has been a huge joy getting to this milestone. It really has. Star Wars lads, you guys are great. Keep it up. Thank you so much, Toydarian Dan. Really, really appreciate that. And we appreciate all of you who have subscribed. We didn't think we'd be at this milestone for quite some time. So it really means a lot that you guys enjoy talking to us, enjoy listening to our conversation about Star Wars, and enjoy partaking in these conversations weekly, even if we disagree, even if we dislike different things. We appreciate that you guys come to this space to discuss Star Wars, to enjoy those discussions, and to give each other our points of view without any real judgment on whether you're right or you're wrong. It is your point of view, and that's completely acceptable.
Yeah, no, absolutely echo all those sentiments. Thank you guys so much. 10K, right? Like, we were not not even in the ballpark of that when doing some of our own estimates just a couple months ago, right? And it's been like 3-ish years now since we really started posting on YouTube. Before that, we were just a podcast that started in COVID, like so many others, right? So to be in this position now, like, we're really grateful for that. And yeah, again, if you don't like Acolyte, that's totally fine. But you're gonna find on our channel, like, just how I have a very different opinion from Liam, right? Usually we're actually a lot closer on a lot of stuff. We're still really respectful about this. Like, we're still listening to what each other has to say. Maybe we're trying to nudge each other a little bit here and there for sure, but that's just how we are, right? And that's how we want everyone in our community to feel, right? That you can share all your thoughts, and as long as you're not attacking anybody, you're not attacking anyone in the chat or the creatives, right? You just have like criticisms or just how you feel, and you're just being honest about it and trying to make great discussion out of it. You'll always have a place here in the Star Wars Lads fandom. Like that is the thing that we've been really, really pressed on about doing from the start. We're like, if we're gonna do this, we want to be fair and positive, right? If we can't be positive, we're still gonna be fair, right? And that's just how it's going to be. There's going to be people on Twitter, Instagram, and all that who might love this episode, who might absolutely hate this episode, right? And they still have valid reasons. And we're not going to ever become an echo chamber of just hating on something or just becoming too positive. That's not us. We're both from a filmmaking background, and we started off a lot of our critiques with like the editing, with character beats and stuff like that. We're not just trying to throw things out there for the sake of content. We really do want to bring the best discussions that we can to the Star Wars fandom. So yeah, 10K if you guys believe in that, and we look forward to you guys sticking around and hopefully more people joining around. But that's really the thesis of this whole thing. This channel is only going to continue to grow stronger and hopefully have people who like are encouraged to look into filmmaking, are encouraged to like break down stuff, just like how looking at all those prequel documentaries as a kid, the behind the scenes of all that stuff really encouraged us to really pursue film and have that be one of
Mhm.
our biggest passions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that I would point to that. Star Wars was my first real film love, and watching those behind the scenes things like a million times, especially the
Oh
Phantom
yeah.
Menaces, is
Oh
so
yeah.
good. And I watched that over and over because I just couldn't get enough of it, and it truly made me fall in love with the art form. And now here we are. We're talking Star Wars every week, and I wouldn't be happier without doing talking Star Wars. It's even in a show that I have been unabashedly open about the fact that I don't like this show. I don't think it's very good. I still have fun talking with you guys every week about Star Wars because it's Star Wars and I love it. And we're just trying to give our takes. So thank you so much for 10K, everybody. And if you are watching and you haven't subscribed, subscribe because you're going to get a lot of great content on this channel and hopefully become part of the community we're building here because that's really important to us too, is community. And we really interact with you guys a lot, as much as we can, via chats, responding to comments still, doing the community brackets, which have been great to get your guys' opinions and stuff. There's been so many fun things and ways to interact with our audience that it feels like a big kind of a group of Star Wars friends here, talking about a group of Star Wars lads per se, talking about Star Wars and just having fun with it. So thank you guys all so much. And without further ado, let's get back to the chat. Going back to the top, we have Upra Tibi, who says, also love the explanation of how the twins were made. Well, there you go. I'm glad you enjoyed that explanation. Hopefully, we get more of that in the coming weeks, but glad you enjoyed the episode. Anthony Tiff says, love the episode. Didn't expect it to be that intense and haven't been as immersive in a show in a while. The explanation of the twins' creation makes sense to me and is completely different from Anakin's creation in both canon and legends. I'm glad you're enjoying the show so much. That is definitely a strong take, and we always appreciate your strong takes on here and for joining us on the chat, Anthony. So thanks for sharing your opinion. And hey, I don't like the show, but that's completely fair for you to enjoy it. I'm very glad you do.
Yeah, and I am enjoying the show, right? I don't know if I necessarily would put it right now as like the top of my favorite things, but I can appreciate that we're not destroying any lore per se, right? We're not making things too unnecessary. Like I feel like some parts of like Ahsoka's character, right, kind of becomes like, okay, we're connecting to stuff that happens in the original trilogy. We're bringing characters. Oh, Sabine is force sensitive when she was such a cool Mandalorian. Like those things, you know, don't bother me too much, but I would argue those weigh more heavily on me than anything that's happened in the Acolyte so far. Right now, it just feels like a lot of stuff for me that is very different from what I've read. A lot of the books and everything are more Sith focused, Jedi focused, how they view the Force. This is a lot more into just something new. And, maybe right now it's not the best, but, people in 1999 might not necessarily have loved the Phantom Menace, but it's become such a big building block for things. So, I'm always looking at Star Wars as something that fixes itself, repairs itself, makes whatever is there eventually stronger. And with other stories, like you can't tell me that Attack the Clones alone sold you on the concept of the Clone Wars. No, not really. But the Clone Wars as it's its own thing, yeah, absolutely loved it. So, always thank you for sharing your thoughts here. I will say I definitely need to know a little bit more about the convergence because I need to see how exactly that was like used or like sourced, if Coral still was the one carrying these children to birth, if
Yeah,
Mother Anastasia has the physical features shared with these children. Need to
right.
still see that. I hope that's not something to be set aside until like a season two. That definitely feels like something that we should see like physical evidence of, like a laboratory or something like that. Once they're supposedly on Brendock in the finale. So I'm glad that you're confident about it. I definitely do feel better. It's a convergence instead of just like she just willed it out of the Force. I think that would have definitely made me like a little upset about the show. But as it is now, I'm just enjoying it for what it is. I'm hoping that it's gonna be great. There's been weeks that it has been great. Like I don't think anyone's gonna take away episode 5 from me. That was a fantastic week of Star Wars for me. I just absolutely enjoyed seeing truly the best cinematography and dueling choreography in a long time for Star Wars since the prequels that also understood that prequels are sometimes a little too flashy for no reason. There was still weight in the fight that I really appreciated with the active hits, with the camera angles. So yeah, I'm glad you're enjoying that, Anthony. We're looking forward to more plot, more character being established in the finale, but we're glad that it's working for you right now.
Yeah, and just off that point too, like I feel like where they might be going with the whole Vergence thing is that maybe Mother Anastasia, they're looking for a way to create somebody and they don't have enough power to do it, so they use the virgins on this planet to do so. I think something like that might be what they're going for because we still don't know, obviously, all these mothers, we don't know how these children were created. So first of all, there's the inception of them, right? So there's still a virgin birth possibility on the table, which I would not necessarily very much like. um, but it is different than the chosen one prophecy in a few ways. So hopefully they have some explanation. Hopefully there's a bit more science behind it. Hopefully there is a bit more reason why they're created. Was it just that they wanted kids? That's a little less interesting to me than if there's like a destiny for these girls. And we'll see what they have in store next week. I really hope to God they don't save that for season two. Like I think, you know, a lot of these questions, the sad thing about this is a lot of these questions were posed in the first two episodes, first three episodes, if you want to include that mystery. And we're still searching for the answers. And I feel like that's been one of the most frustrating parts about the show is like, I have the patience to wait weeks for these answers. I don't need them right away, but I think you need to tease the audience and start spelling them out. And then now we're on the last episode and there's still no answers for a lot of the bigger mysteries, a lot of the bigger lore mysteries. That's what's a little concerning is like, okay, what do we have chance to do in episode 8? And also, what do we have a chance to do in a satisfactory manner in episode 8? How do we not speed through this and just like, you know, cut. Oh, yep. Explanation here, explanation there, explanation. Fight. Okay, it's over. Plagueis reveal. And I don't know how we're not going to get to that, but hopefully you guys have more faith than I do in this show and that we do get something concrete and good next week. Gene the Machine says, congratulations, Star Wars lads, on 10,000 subs. Thanks for all the great content. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much again for the super chat. It really means a lot to us every time you guys contribute or join us on the show, but it especially means a lot this week having hit 10,000 subscribers. It's a huge milestone for our channel. So we really couldn't be happier with how it's going right now, and hopefully all of you stick around for the future of Star Wars lads after the Acolyte, because there are some exciting things still coming this year. We all forget about Skeleton Crew, but Seneca and I have
Yeah.
talked off screen. You know, like what if that's the sleeper hit? Like that's the optimistic Star Wars fan in both of us still being there. Is like, man, what if, you know, it's been a few misses over the last couple of years with Star Wars, but what if Skeleton Crew's the one that just like comes out of nowhere and hits a home run?
Yeah.
It's possible, and hopefully you guys stick around for that.
Definitely. I mean, I hope Skeleton Crew is a worthwhile addition to the Mandoverse because I would have taken another season of The Mandalorian or another season of
So good.
originally planned Rangers of the New Republic, right? Something to like have some weight, especially with the connections that we still kind of really need between New Republic stuff and what Thrawn is doing, what Shadow Council is setting up, what is going to go on with the underworld, especially with Book of Boba Fett not really getting any signs of a season 2, right? That could have been a season used for any of these shows, right? But it's not. It's used for Skeleton Crew, and it was conceived from the start by John Watts. You know, you got Jude Law, who's not just some nobody actor, right? And you're trying to make your Stranger Things in space. Whatever happens here, I hope it's a great show and it really fits into the spirit of the Maniverse and has big plot developments. Because if there's a show that could just be a one-off season but still be so crucial to connecting all the pieces together, at least just the world building, yeah, maybe that is what Skeleton Crew is, right? I'm it's like how Acolyte is right this year. I don't know what to expect from Acolyte, and I don't know what to expect from Skeleton Crew, and I don't think I've ever had a year of Disney Plus Star Wars shows where I'm like, I have no idea what's gonna happen. You have a general feeling because it's based on the movie, it's based on the stuff, but these two shows, yeah, I have zero clue, and that's what makes me excited.
Hmm. Yeah, sometimes there is a bit of anticipation and the unknown. I mean, this one, Acolyte, there was unknown, and it's been a miss, in my opinion. But it doesn't mean I'm any less excited for what's coming in the future. Just want to give my constructive criticisms for hopefully the next round of Star Wars stuff. Anthony Tiff says, also kind of off topic, but what do you think of my idea that some fans are too emotionally invested in Star Wars project as a reason why people are hating on this show? It makes sense if Star Wars becomes intertwined with your identity. Any bad or mediocre Star Wars project feels like an offense to your very being. Well, Anthony, I don't think you're wrong in a lot of ways. I mean, a lot of us, in good and bad ways, right? A lot of us have Star Wars as a part of our identity. I would say it's a part of my identity, but that doesn't necessarily mean you can't distance yourself from the work, right? Like Star Wars, for those of you who are joining and discussing Star Wars with us on a Tuesday night, right after an episode dropped, an hour after an episode dropped, it's a part of what we love, right? It's part of the very fabric of what makes our interest in pop culture. It's something that we want so desperately to be good because we're spending our time investing ourselves in this universe, investing ourselves in these shows, investing ourselves in hours, hundreds of hours of TV and film and books and comics and video games. And so I think that's where, those people who get defensive over Star Wars, I think we all have to remember as the side where we're trying to say, hey, everybody's opinion is welcome over here. I think we have to remember that a lot of us have a right to get defensive over Star Wars with how much time we invest in it. Now, you never have a right to do the things that a lot of these people do, right? To attack the creators personally, to attack anybody involved, to you know go over the top with a lot of the criticisms out there, nitpick everything, not never be happy no matter what, review bomb. All those types of things are just kind of pointless and childish and have nothing to do with the root of the problem, and actually harm the root of the problem because nobody will ever listen to the more moderate fans like us who are just trying to say, hey, this is what we liked and didn't like about it, and then do with that what you will. But nobody wants to listen to us because there's those other people out there who are making it even worse because creators lock themselves in a bubble to avoid hearing those other people. And so that's something I've been very big on this channel. But I do understand, as a passionate Star Wars fan my whole life, I understand the disappointment of certain projects not ending the way you want. I understand the disappointment of things not being good when you just hope for something quality, right? I understand that. And as Star Wars becomes a bigger and bigger franchise, a franchise with more and more out there, before we just got 6 movies in 30 years, we got 2 shows in 10 years, and they were both animated, right? Before, our amount of content was so little that it felt like you needed to hit a home run every time. I think what people nowadays need to accept is that, yeah, it's disappointing when we don't get these things, but you can shrug it off and have the next one, right? There's always that next one to look forward to. But it doesn't mean you should just accept that. I think that's the fine line. Is you should never accept mediocrity, but there's a fine line between not accepting mediocrity and going too far. And that's what a lot of people can't find nowadays, is how to straddle that line. We try our best to do it here. But yeah, I think that's where that Star Wars being too much a part of your identity can blur those lines, and that's where I think you're right in a lot of ways, Anthony.
Yeah, no, definitely great points there. And I'd like to also like highlight like some of the things that have been happening during the Acolyte that you're not going to see from us on this channel, right? You can look at Liam's video for characters who are going to appear in the Acolyte, right? Just 3 weeks ago or something, people were like, "Oh my God, Kiadi Mundi's here," right? And let's think about it like just logically, right? You got these characters that are going to be somewhat tangentially related to the events of the prequels. Who's going to probably be alive 100 years later? An alien, right? And who's going to be an alien that people are going to care about? Well, you've only got a few that really matter, especially in episode 1, that people can like point out to. That's going to be Yoda and that's going to be Mundi. And it's not just this show, it's the High Republic as a whole. They don't want to use Yoda like at all. He is very limited. He is kind of just goofing off, doing his own thing. Like I say goofing off in the nicest way. He's definitely doing important things, but he's not really like invested in much of the conflicts that are going on. He really just does feel like how he does with the Clone Wars, where he's kind of just on Coruscant and he lets other people deal with it. So that leaves us with Mundi of the characters that we're going to pay attention to. No one really paid attention to Yaddle because there's no close up of Yaddle or Opal Rancisis, right? And when Liam was making his video, one thing we talked about off camera was like there wasn't a canon birth date, right? Yeah, there's Topps cards, there's the digital episode 1 guide to the characters and events and plot that came out on like an old CD-ROM back in the day, but there wasn't anything that said specifically, hey, Kiadi Mundi had to be born 96 BBY as determined by the original Star Wars 1998 comics, which doesn't even talk about the date there. It's again from those cards and stuff. But then you see some creatives online who are just attacking Wikipedia. This is a fan website that is essentially what all these source books that we used to read growing up, all these great pictures and layouts of ships and characters, but online, right? Like I can say as a Star Wars fan myself, I would not be anywhere more of a Star Wars fan without Wikipedia. Wikipedia has been something that I used to read when I couldn't get the novels. At one point, my parents were like, "You got to try other things. We're going to tell you to stop reading Star Wars and checking it out from the library." When I was like in elementary school, and then I found Wikipedia, right? But these things changed. I mean, and Star Wars has always been contradictory on so many details, right? Like one of my favorite examples, and one of the things I was horrified to discover as a kid, was the Jedi Prince series. That it is bad, guys. It is like, I know we talk about Children of the Jedi, all the Barbara Hamlin books. Man, that is a bad series. There's like they had to retcon the fact that that series technically had like the first real marriage of Han and Leia. There's a character who's supposedly like a Jedi Prince, but his name is Ken. There's Tricolus, who is not a clone, but sort of related to Palpatine. And then there's just so much in those six books that came within like a year or two of the Thrawn trilogy. And imagine being in 95, you're like, wow, the Thrawn trilogy, that was awesome. Some of those X-Wing books that started off are great. What am I reading here? What is this, right? And yeah, I mean, that's how Star Wars has been. But we hope, especially with Disney saying like everything is on a level of canon. It's not like George Lucas canon, television canon, all these things. We hope that stuff actually makes sense, right? Like, if you look at one of our early hits on this channel, was us being a little upset that like the Kanan comics origin issue of Order 66 is totally redone and totally different in Bad Batch, with bringing Kanan, who's not really necessary for that show at all, right? So these details, like, we can voice frustrations about because we care about the canon, we care about these details because we have obsessed over these details our whole lives. But attacking people who spend their time to like update a fan Wikipedia site, attacking creatives because they want to do things differently, or they don't care that people are going to read a comic that came out 2015, that's not cool, man. And that's not what we're going to be like. So I can totally see why people who are like us, who obsessed about every detail, who collected everything, like you could see in the back, Liam's got all the canon books, all the Legends books. There are people who are burned by the EU being wiped free, right? Who feel like that's such a better universe than whatever we got with the sequels and all that. That's fair to say, but like attacking people, saying, oh, buzzwords like it's woke and everything is destroyed, and Kathleen Kennedy, one of the greatest producers of all time, mind you, is now suddenly a hack, instead of saying, hey, maybe she's not great at being the head of Lucasfilm, maybe she was always better as a producer. There's no subtlety anymore, right? And that comes with being so intrinsically dependent on like Star Wars being this perfect thing again and again and again. But that's what people have to learn about. Like, this is just, in at the end of the day, a big franchise that has survived for decades in ways many don't. And now it's not necessarily the top dog. We've got the Marvel Cinematic Universe for so long, the top dog, right? For the last like 10 something years, but now it's in arguably a very bad like, nadir, right? It's not doing so hot. There are people who are criticizing everything. But what I find so interesting there is that they're not attacking the creatives just because they're women, or because they find something wrong about the characterization, right? Like, that's what we as Star Wars fans know, but not every Star Wars fan knows how to handle the rejection of the things just not going their way. And that's okay. You don't have to love everything. Again, we made it very clear. Liam's not a big fan of the show. I find it fun, but I'm not going to say it's anything special. And we both hoped it was going to be. But to be all upset, tie on your details to like something that some creative on live and some content creators saying that honestly is false a lot of the times. Yeah, that sucks. And that's what people have to learn. These franchises, the people behind them, we want them to listen to us. We want them to hear our voices. But like saying, "Oh, you should die," or "You've ruined my whole life," and stuff like this, like you're not gonna get anywhere with that. No one's gonna listen to you, and that's what polarizes everything, and that's what's polarizing Star Wars for a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the things about these creators, right? You guys, you just have to remember, and and not trying to promote our channel over other people's channels. Really, I'm just being honest. There's a political side to YouTube, and part of that is the nature of what sells. YouTube is a business. You have to create things that sell. So people create uproars over things that they know they can sell. They might not even mean it. You always have to take everything people say if they're trying to convince you of something with a grain of salt. I feel like that's what we try to do best on this channel is we don't try to convince you of anything. We might point out our point of view, but we're not going to try to tell you that you're wrong because you're not. It's your point of view, just like mine is my point of view. It's more people might agree with one point of view or rather than the other, but you're never going to hear us tell you no, you're wrong, you're flat out wrong for what you believe about Star Wars. We all love Star Wars for different reasons. So that's what you have to remember when you check out some of these bigger channels or a lot of channels, even smaller channels that are trying to come up, right? It's about what sells. And so they have to cater to what sells to make money, to make more videos, to get a bigger audience. Always, I'm a more cynical person than a lot of people, but remember the cynics have that cynicism when you check out a lot of YouTube channels because a lot of people are in it for the love and the passion and the creation, right? Other people who try to start agendas are more in it for the cynicism, uh, to create and fabricate something that will boost their ratings. It's something you see in television or film. They cater to audiences to make money. That's just the nature of business world. And I'm not saying they're wrong to do that. It's part of the business. It's just you got to take it with a grain of salt sometimes when you see products because every product is made for a reason. So that's my little spiel on that. Back to Uper Tibby, who says some people have bad intentions and don't care. Some don't know all shows or don't understand. Not all shows are for them. They just have to watch. LOL. Yeah, there's plenty of reasons why people get in an uproar. Again, I guess we've been on that topic for a while, so we'll keep moving on. But good points there. Ichijin 511 says, "Wait, did I miss something? What was the explanation for how they were created?" There's no real explanation. It's just that there's a vergence, and they say that the only way two people can be created from one would be with something powerful enough like a vergence. That's what Torben says, and the rest of them seem to agree. So we still don't have the full answers. Don't get us wrong. There are not full answers. It's just something with the vergence and the force is what it's more around. But that same word was used for Anakin. So I'm not moving out of that that we're in the clear yet, personally. But I think we've at least steered in a direction that's a little bit more grounded in lore than just randomly out of nowhere. So hopefully
Yeah, yeah, totally agree.
that's
And like the thing I can like kind of compare it to is maybe like the Valley of the Jedi, or like where there's like a concentration of the Force. I hope it's not just like a crystal or something. I hope it's like almost like a location like that pit. I feel like has to be something related to that, and we still don't see the pit,
right.
right? We see Osha survive and go off with Soul, but then we see May fall down. Does she somehow almost get like pulled into that pit? Right? Is there like almost like a symbiotic connection that these twins have to that? Like that could be really interesting to see, like to have the Force just be the environment, right? We've had characters like the Bendu who are like, "Oh, I'm in the middle," and they're just come out of nowhere, and then when they get shot, they disappear or die. We don't know yet, right? And like Liam brought up, they could just be past that, all these mothers, or they could be dead because the connection of like channeling everything and controlling a Wookiee and putting their whole souls into it. Maybe they just weren't as powerful as Thanos and all that. There's a lot of things, details that I think they took a good step towards, but yeah, they didn't explain it, right? I think they've just taken us away from being like, aha, like I can use the Force to make children. And that was the biggest worry I think all of us had. And that I feel like that's pretty clearly like saying that like Anastasia did not just poof, like think of it and it happened. I think that's the nice part. And that was the thing I was worried about for sure after episode 3. Now will I be totally sold on like what everything's gonna happen? I don't know. I don't know, but I think I'm gonna at least be like, okay, that's a thing in Star Wars, and the lore will work itself around it, and people will flesh it out in books and games and comics or whatever. So yeah, definitely want to say that. Yeah, that is what we know, right? That is all the show is telling us in this episode. We don't have a concrete like this is a fact answer. We haven't seen it. We haven't seen the quite literally what the Virgins is, right? If Anakin is a walking Virgins, does that mean that there's like a being that was manifested here, like a Sith or something, like, or is it Chimera? Like we don't know these answers. we're assuming that it could be a location, a thing. There's some visual cues, but yeah, nothing that's actually like, here we go. The camera's focused on your, here's your exposition dump, whatever it may be. It's not there yet.
And I'm looking forward to going back to the fortress next episode. Like I think exploring the remains, the ruins of the fortress would be something cool. And I think it will add an interesting layer to it next week. And hopefully that is something that happens. I know what did Leslie Headland said a while ago that the finale was under 40 minutes, I believe. So I'm not expecting anything that's going to have time for us to just talk about things in the fortress or see different aspects that we haven't seen before. If that happens, we're going to have to get rushed into it real quick, but we still have the whole OSHA side of the story to touch on because this episode was basically nothing about OSHA and Kamir. It was only about Soul and May. So I do think they got to do a lot with that storyline. So there's a lot to do in very little time if we're looking at another 35, 40 minutes at most. So we'll see next week. Anthony sends in a super chat. Again, thank you so much, Anthony, for participating in our streams and our chats. And we greatly appreciate your super chat. Anthony says, I love Wikipedia and have edited some things on there. People have been saying Kathleen Kennedy was going to get fired for 6 years now. So, yeah, as for Wikipedia, I love Wikipedia too. Use it all the time. Double check myself on a lot of facts all the time there. I've edited some pages in a funny way in the past, and they got taken down. Yeah, it's a great resource, and I really appreciate Wikipedia and all the people that work over there on for everything they do. It's wonderful work. And yeah, to clarify kind of what Sonic was talking about before, when I made my characters who should be in the Acolyte, which I would have never thought before I made that video that the only one from there who would be in the Acolyte would be Kiadi Mundi. Like that would have never crossed my mind. I only included him in the video because there was a slight possibility. So at least one right in that video. That's a pretty good record. Um, but yeah, I would have never expected that. But as for Kiadi Mundi, there's no I made that video a week before episode 1 of the show came out. There was no birthday for him on Wikipedia for canon. There's a birth year for Legends, no birthday. Birth year for Legends, and I mentioned that in the video. Go watch it. It's still up on the channel. Still relevant. One more episode. But yeah, there's a there's no birthday for him in canon. So whatever, that's a first-hand account. I have no agenda. I'm just telling you what I saw. So there you go. Next up, Uper Tibi, Virgins. Anthony says, okay, wait, I think that's the same train. So we'll move on to Ovier de la Cruz, who says it was good, but so much needs to happen in the next episode. I also hope you guys are having a good day. Well, thank you so much for that for those well wishes, and I completely agree. I was shocked that this didn't reveal more. A lot more reveals need to come next week. And if those reveals aren't revealed in season 1, they better have season 2 pretty much already ready to go to be announced soon, like Boba Fett style. Otherwise, it'll be an incredible disappointment and bordering on, I hate to use this word, but bordering on waste of time if you don't reveal all the big mysteries of the show and save them for a second season if that second season never gets announced, right? So they have to reveal them either this season or know that the second season is coming out. So hopefully we get that next week, Ovier.
Yeah, no, I fully on board, fully agree with those points. Glad you're enjoying it. Thanks for enjoying our channel. But yeah, no, I hope this is at least touching 50. I feel like I read Leslie saying that it was going to touch closer to 50, but it could be closer to touching the 40, right? I don't know. Again, we're fully on board in agreement between us. These are just short episodes for no reason, right? Especially with the reported 180 million. Like I can see if we have like maybe another big lightsaber duel, like okay, like I can understand we're maybe closer to 120, 30, and then maybe some stuff was kind of not shot well or had a reshoot or something like that. I can buy that a little bit more if we have another massive duel or something. I'm glad that we got to see some pretty solid action in this episode. That no matter what, action is going to be more expensive than just walking and talking. But yeah, no, I mean, we need to know more. Leslie has been saying there's possibilities of a season 2 here, but this is going to be like a closed, completed story. Um, let's make sure that happens, right? At this point, I hope it's not rushed. I'm of the opinion it won't necessarily be, because I think the only two things you have to deal with for sure are showing us the convergence and then having everybody like around in the Brendok ruins, and then whatever Keimer wants to do, because that dude is his own wild beast. So just give us an explanation of the birth through that convergence, and I think I'd be satisfied with that. Satisfied with the season as a whole, that's a different thing. But as far as like lore developments, make sure you close it off here for sure. And I hope if we get 50 minutes, I can see that being like satisfactory. If it's closer to 40, yeah, I mean, it's gonna feel like Mando season 3 finale, like fun, good, but not
Yeah.
necessarily like rich as we're really hoping for.
Yeah, that's a good comparison. I think that was a solid action-packed, exciting finale, great visuals, but it lacked on the story elements, and that's what we've seen a lot of times from these Disney Plus shows that pace their shows like movies. I wouldn't expect that from The Acolyte, considering the people involved were TV people, not movie
Right.
people.
Yeah.
But hopefully, that is more of the case, that we get a well paced out ending that actually has some great character reveals and interesting stuff that builds to season two, besides just you know cameo or quick wrap up to plot points, because there and that's overall the most frustrating thing about the show. There are ideas that are interesting, just nothing seems to want to focus on them. It wants to just propel the story forward. My man Liam sent us a super chat. Thank you so much, Liam. Says congrats on 10K. Y'all got me into the comics. I'm loving them. So glad you're enjoying them. Which ones are you reading, if you don't mind me asking? I guess I'm just easy to please, but any criticism I have is easy to overlook when this show got me back into Star Wars. Well, that's a great opinion to have. We have not heard that from too many people, that the Acolyte got them back into Star Wars. So glad you're enjoying it that much, and hopefully you're enjoying the universe of Star Wars. There's so much here to offer, so many great things. We have so many guides to check out if you're looking for the best of or essentials. So check all those out, and yeah, so glad you're enjoying Star Wars again. If the Acolyte is what got you back in, then I'm so happy that the Acolyte is out there for you to enjoy Star Wars, because we all need our thing to introduce us into this universe.
Yeah, and maybe in 5 years, if this channel is going strong, we're gonna have people who are watching the young High Republic adventures, and they're like, Nubs got me into Star Wars, and that's what introduced. But like, there's genuinely like a chance of that happening, and that is awesome, right? That okay, maybe to go with the cynical point of view first, it's like, okay, it's a massive, big franchise with a even more massive conglomerate, making sure Star Wars is sticking to every age range, group, and all that. Yeah, like that's all true. But the world of Star Wars is so fun and rich. It's full of possibilities. Relatively speaking, because of the stranglehold that has been there with like the lack of video game, thanks to the EA deal, just with the sequel trilogy being the focus for so long, and then this Mandoverse era. Once things start to get into more book initiatives, once comics continue to grow and kind of carve out their own space, which I would argue comics in canon have always had way more weight, no matter what, compared to what we've gotten in the Legends continuity. Like, you can point to Star Wars Republic, but that was a very late Legends thing, comparatively, right? You can say Dark Empire. I don't know if I'd say Dark Empire and Thrawn trilogy necessarily connect too well, but that's a different story. But yeah, no, it's awesome to see what perspectives get you into Star Wars. It's awesome, Liam, that you definitely came from a different point of view than the Liam on this channel for sure. So, it's that's awesome, and very glad for that. And for a little bit my own personal plug, I guess you might have seen some of my comics arcs summarized. I think I'm gonna probably redo that series in a bit of a different way, just because it's just becoming a little bit like long and droning. I want to make it so that you guys can actually pick up on the characters, the relevant beats a bit more. So stay tuned for that. I think that'll be one of my more bigger projects, and going to be a little bit more of my focus until Skeleton Crew, which we don't have a date for anyway. So yeah, comics, we've had periods where it's been a big thing on our channel. and then we've had periods where it's like non-existent, and then it's some false starts here and there. But we want comics to be such a big thing here because comics have been amazing. Like if you ask people today of the canon, what is like one of the best things that the comics have done? It's Darth Vader. Like Darth Vader
Mhm.
has not been this incredibly OP and dark and twisted and still having such a rich character development. You can point to like Darth Vader in the Ghost Prison, which we did review, right? As one of our Legends Book Club reviews. But and I mean, I would trade any of these. I'd trade that in any day for any of these Star Wars comic books that lines that have featured Darth Vader. He's become such a great character in the comics. We got the first reveal of Boba Fett telling Darth Vader, I didn't know who you sent me after, but I got a name, Skywalker, and that's how he knows. Like that's still such a massive thing that I don't think comics of the EU ever really got close to. You can maybe say Jedi versus Sith, and then how it got kind of retconned by the Bane trilogy, but yeah, no, it's awesome. It's fantastic that Star Wars comics are in a glorious heyday of importance compared to maybe the last thing being really that early Marvel line from right when the original movies were coming out in terms of like people thinking about this stuff. But yeah, no, we're gonna bring comics back in a good way. Make sure though to check out comics if you haven't, right? Like a lot of comic creatives have been saying, like the industry, thanks to YouTube, they're seeing a lot of their hard work just summarized and then put out there. And I think I'm a little bit at fault there too because I try to basically do that. But yeah, no, these are really great stories. It's a great medium. It's an important medium for art in general. A lot of other art tends to pull directly from it or adapt it, just like how books are adapted. So go to your local comic book store, use a digital comic subscription, do whatever you can, support these creatives because that's what's going to ensure that comics are going to have a really important, healthy place in the Star Wars canon moving forward.
Absolutely. Comics, Star Wars has had some fundamental comics over the years and definitely worth checking out. I did do an essential comics. You guys can check out video if you want to see that. It is linked to the playlist on how to read Star Wars. So if you want to check that out, do so. But it is there are so many great Star Wars comics that add so much to the lore. And I think really honestly, in a lot of ways, the comics in canon have done so more than the novels in canon a lot of times. So check them out. And then Liam said the comments. He is reading our Dr. Aphra, the High Republic mainline, and then High Republic Adventures. Want to start on the Star Wars series next. So glad you're enjoying those. High Republic Adventures, especially phase one. Massive surprise to us when we read them for the first time.
Yeah.
Like, was not expecting them to be that good. So hopefully you're enjoying those. And Dr. Aphra is a strong series to read as well, especially that first run. I really enjoyed. And then Snips for Life, another super chat. Thank you so much, Snips for Life. Congrats on 10K, my fave channel on YouTube. So happy you're enjoying the content. Thank you so much for that super chat. And we are about halfway through the stream, everybody. So keep sending in those questions. If you have them, we'll try to get through them as much as we can. And we do have way more people watching that have liked than have liked the stream. So make sure you like the stream. Really helps us get out there to more people, discuss more Star Wars with everybody. So please like it if you haven't. And if you are new, subscribe. We still have one more episode of The Acolyte left, and we have plenty more live streams coming here in the future and a lot of great content. So subscribe if you are new. And if you are looking for more Star Wars lads, we do have a Patreon and YouTube membership program. You can check those out. We have a couple of our members here in the chat tonight. And we're excited to continue making more and more content for you all and getting more and more perks out to as many of you who can subscribe as possible. So if you're looking for more great stuff, check out our memberships or Patreon. All right, back to the top for each Gen 511 said, I heard they had exactly identical M counts and a vergence, but no details. The vergence is not an explanation. It's the effect of the cause. What's the cause? Yeah, exactly. That's what I was saying earlier. We don't have an actual cause yet. We'd have the reason that they were possibly created, why they were maybe created on that planet, but we don't know exactly the reason. So we will see next week. Anthony says vergences can create life. For example, the wellspring of life being the source of midichlorians and the light side of the Force. And we do have plenty of examples of how vergences affect Force users in the saga. But the wellspring of life, I think, is a very big one. It's hard to point to that one as like, okay, we could have something as powerful as the wellspring of life on Brendok, right? Like I think that's a just like Anakin as the chosen one, that's like a unique thing. There needs to be some uniqueness in Star Wars. That's the only thing I argue is that we can't just add people willy nilly to the mythology or lore willy nilly that's that consequential out of nowhere that doesn't also stem back and affect what's going on with the Skywalker saga. So you have to tiptoe, you have to be careful. And I think the Wellspring of Life is a great example, Anthony, but it's also something that is like so so much on the high end of the power spectrum of Star Wars, right? That
Yeah.
you can't really compare it to whatever the Vergence here is on Brendok. You would think when you think of a Vergence on Brendok, you think more of the Dagobah Cave or the pit that you see in the Last Jedi, something of that nature. And that's why I do think as we get deeper and deeper into the fortress, we might discover what our actual Vergence is.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the fortress is the most unused character of the show. Like May is definitely fighting off just by having some earlier appearances, but the fortress, if we really get to see what was built around it, why it's such a focus, like it's an old mining fortress, but then why is this pit so important? Did it just start in a very convenient location, right? Or is it something that other beings and species were here during the High Republic, and then uh, they were able to tap into something before things went wrong with the Great Hyperspace Disaster? There's a lot to like play around with here. Uh, let's just use it in a fun way. Let's just use it in a way that is tangential, not necessarily like cause and effect for what happens in Skywalker Saga, because that's got to be its own thing. It's too important for us to be like, okay, this is what led to something with Anakin's birth. Now, did it influence thinking? Did it influence Plagueis? Did it influence the will of the Force eventually? Sure, I don't mind that at all, right? And this is a show that Leslie has been saying this is going to give us a different perspective on the Sith, on the Jedi. That's all cool, right? But if you're going to make the story fun and important for viewers to stick around with, you've got to explain it. You've got to show it to us.
Hmm. Tater Tot says, I was hoping to get all the answers in this episode, but now I'm just left with more questions. There's a lot to wrap up in the next episode. Not my favorite, but wasn't terrible. 7 out of 10. Glad you enjoyed it, Tater Tot. And thanks for your review. Anthony says, oh, I think that's part of the previous chain. I kind of skipped through some of the chain comments so that we can keep going to the next questions. Ichigen511 says, I'm enjoying The Acolyte and loved this episode. Just didn't think the Vergence explains anything. Coral said to Anastasia, what would the Jedi think if they knew how they were created? This is not the answer. We're going to see the answer, hopefully, or at least find out what the answer is later. And that is a big point of this episode, right? Is the constant emphasis on creation. And you would think it would be something that would bother Soul for the future, right? Like, why is he, and what's the attachment, right? How does he feel this attachment to Osha out of nowhere? I think there's something that's fabricated there, and we need to kind of figure it out. Otherwise, it's yet again another thing that I feel like kind of comes out of just plot convenience, right? So hopefully, to avoid another plot convenience, we actually explain what is the thing that connects them. What's the thing that makes him feel like, for the first time ever, I need and want an apprentice? What's the thing that drives him forward to do all these drastic actions in this episode? Hopefully we get those answers, as he especially will be back on Brendok next episode. And the way people have teleported in this show across planets out of nowhere, I think Khmer and Osha will also be back to Brendok next episode, probably at the same time May and Soul do in the next week's finale.
Yeah, I mean, we have that shot of May's ship, who now would be used by OSHA since it's on that planet with Chimere, right? So presumably they're taking that, and then maybe they're already on their way to the planet, and then once they jump out, because like it's I like that shot that we saw today very clearly of that ringed planet in the sky that
Yeah.
has that eclipse convergence. It's going to happen there. It's not going to happen at Brendok, but they also have to survive it in good shape to make it to Brendok's surface. So yeah, I'm looking forward to why that has to take place. What's going to be like, fascinating about like this, why Soul is so obsessed with making this chase happen, because it looks more and more so that he wants to make the chase happen. He's obsessed with like kind of keeping some things under wraps. And even if this episode is what he told to May, there is still a little bit something going on there. I'm not sold on this just being everything, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, and we have to assume he's going back to Brendock when he jumps into hyperspace before Vernestra arrives last episode. So if he's going to Brendock, he's searching for something or he's looking for something. Hopefully, that's an interesting explanation towards the overall journey that this character takes, and not just he's going back there because he couldn't think of anything else to do. I think a fight or something maybe causes the crash. I'm less on now the Chimera attacking him train as much as I'm on the maybe the May breaks out point, and now after his reveal, whatever his reveal does to her, which I'm still confused what it's going to tell her that she doesn't already know. Whatever that reveal does to her mental state, maybe she attacks him and causes the ship to crash because it's already not doing well. It's already malfunctioning. So we'll see next week. Uh, Ichigen says, oh, wait, I already answered that one. So we'll move on. Skywalker's Academy says, hello there. Mike Welch says, they said in the episode that the vergence on the planet is powerful enough for someone to use it to create life. That is an explanation in my book. That it's a justification, in my opinion. It's a thing you can fall back on. I think the way these kids are created though is too emphasized to not fully explain it. So I think you're right in that they've used it as the backbone, as the justification for why, but I don't think it's a full explanation on who these girls are and why they're so important and why they need to be twins, why they needed to be separated into two people. All that stuff is going to play, I think, a bigger role into their creation than just the fact that there's a virgins on this planet.
Yeah, I think the best way to there's a scientific term for it, but I guess like you can call it a catalyst, right? Like this is going to be what's used in the equation to then create the life, right? We know this is going to be like the vessel making this experiment or random act of the force, kind of fully come to being or whatever. Honestly, as channeling whatever Coral is involved with, right? That's all we know, right? And I think having that is a very crucial and big piece that takes me away from then just being like she snapped her fingers and poof, now Coral is carrying her daughters, right? That we've
Right.
gone off of that path, and I'm very happy that that's what this is at least leading us toward or hinting us toward. But we still need to know why she's like, I created them. And like, oh, well, the Jedi wouldn't want to know that. Like, if the Jedi were like, oh, children could come from this virgins, you don't think they'd set up shop here and be like, all right, we're going to have an academy here. We feel we're best prepared to handle beings of the Force. You can also study them, but not like contaminate or control them like other, unregulated Force cultures would. I think they absolutely would, right? That could also
Mm-hmm.
show more of their flaws and hubris, definitely, but that's not what the story's trying to say. The story's trying to say like this is like the one of the major components, but it's not what made it entirely happen.
And they're aware of so many vergences across the galaxy, right? I mean, obviously, Yoda knows of the one on Dagobah before he goes
Yeah.
there. There's a lot of these points. It's not just one specific massive place. It's maybe something that would be important to them to mark down and to know exists, but it's not something they necessarily would say, "Oh my God, now we've got to protect this planet at all costs." It's very important to the fabric of the Force. That's not necessarily true. These things pop up everywhere. It's why the term virgins is used, but in terms of the plot, I think it is more important the emphasis on the creation element. That's why it's going to come back, and because we have Ichigen saying they don't they don't think it's important for us to learn how they were created. I disagree. I think the show has put an emphasis on it. I think if you're putting an emphasis on a plot point that you're trying to develop a mystery about, you've got to reveal it, the plot point, or you have to at least have intention of revealing the plot point. You have to work your way towards it. It can't just be something you dump out in a passing line of dialogue and then plan to never touch again. It's Star Wars fans. I think that's one thing I argue a lot on our channel is when you are a Star Wars creator, you have to know the fandom, right? You have to know that people like us and definitely more radical people on other channels will look through every single line that is said. You can't dump things for no reason. So I think it will be disappointing if they don't reveal anything about it ever again. If this was it, I think it is very disappointing. So I disagree about that, but I also agree with you that there's no actual concrete reveal in this episode. Anthony says, "Nice haircut, Sonic." Tater Tot says the green screen for the speeders kind of sucked. Yeah, green screen's been sucking for speeders since 1983. Uh,
Yeah, nobody can
it's
get it
it,
right.
they don't seem to be able to get it right. It's not as bad though as Book of Boba Fett's. um,
Yeah.
Skywalker's Academy says, I'm thinking the witches aren't dead except Mother Anastasia. Coral definitely didn't die unless Indara killed them by cutting off the connection with Kelnaka. Yeah, that's something I completely agree with. Skywalker's Academy. I think there's still a possibility a lot of them escape. I don't think all of them are going to just be transported to another place, but I think there's a strong possibility that a lot of them did live. I mean, we saw what, at least 20 witches there. They all died from Indara. I mean, she'd have to be insanely powerful to kill them with like kind of a bounce back blow from their possession of Kelnaka, I would think. So I don't buy that they died. The only reason I would buy that they died is that they were knocked out, and when the whole thing explodes, they get caught in the explosion. I'm fine with that. That's a plot point you don't need to reveal. Like if they just want to say everybody died, that's fine with me. I don't need to see that. But if they if they are alive, I'm also okay with that because I think this episode proved that what we thought were dead bodies slain by the Jedi are not. They're knocked out bodies from Indara fighting back through the Force.
Yeah, and I mean, again, this is what I think is like the nicest part about this episode for me. Indara is trying to do the right thing at every point, and she's not trying to be swayed like her Padawan is by, the physical needs of like I want to go back to my comfort place, or like I'm trying to do the right thing like Soul is, right? She's just like I'm detached. I'm not going to make this personal. We've already done too much. I've been taking advice, right? This, even if she had to reveal it, and she can't now because of just how wrong everything went, she still was doing the right thing. She was still trying to make sure that Kilnaka was not going to take out other Jedi and make the situation even worse and potentially erase any chance of explaining what happened here and causing this planet to just then be overrun and whatever life these twins could have to then just be thrown away, right? So, I'll give full credit to her. I was not expecting that from her character, especially with how she's like very like stoic and a little hard, and especially in that first episode. But I'm liking that. I'm liking that Carrie Ann Moss can. She's very good at this, where she can look like someone who's like terrible or does horrible things, but she has meaning. She has value to what she's doing here. So I appreciate that. Shows still another flaw of the Jedi being so disconnected, but I can at least appreciate that it's not from such a negative place.
Anthony says most people I know don't really seem to pay attention to editing. Most people don't know about editing. Most don't come in with their credit hat on. Yeah, we're very well aware of that. It's
Yeah.
just part of our training. We both went to film school, so that's just something we're gonna have to point out. And it's part of our take. It's something that was different than you'll get on other Star Wars channels, I think. So, and I just from a personal note, I've been doing film review since I was in like eighth grade. Doesn't mean I, know more about it than other people. It's just something that's part of the way I watch film. And so that's just going to be my take. And it's not all about it's a lot of it is about the art form, the structure of the art form. Every art form is different. Comics are different than novels, which are different than movies, which are different than shows. And thinking they're all the same, just only focusing on the story misses the trappings of how the art form is prepared. And that's kind of the point of creating a story in that form. You could tell the Acolyte in a book and it would be critiqued in a different way. So I think we have to remember the trappings of what makes a TV show. Uh,
Yeah, no, and just to add to that, right? I think that is a flaw that a lot of Star Wars fans, like completionist fans especially, can fall into, because you're just like, I'm getting what I need. I'm getting the lore. And I'm gonna feel that way about the show, but I'm not gonna ignore its flaws at a technical level, right? It's because I can notice them. It's what like Liam is saying, we've had different classes on sound, on editing, on color, on like just the whole full wheel of everything that can go onto the just one frame on the TV show screen. We're gonna point that out. That's just who we are. But a lot of Star Wars fans who may have been very, very well knowledge about film may just prioritize like this is we got such a crucial lore development or something, and that's what matters to them. But again, it's like saying apples and oranges are the same thing. They're not. They're not. Like they're both wonderful to consume, but you have to appreciate them for their own strengths and what they're actually trying to do and what they are at on their own. And that's going to be a key point no matter what in any of our reviews.
Tater Tot says, "What was the black smoke stuff? Didn't make any sense to me." It's something to do with their power. They can disappear, I guess. I don't know what like one of the contradictions, I guess, in their power is Mother Anastasia does it, and she's kind of like floating there for a while, and somehow Soul can stab her while she's floating, but Coral doesn't and like disappears immediately. So I don't know. There's variations of the power levels. We're gonna have to see how these powers are set out. Hopefully, in the next episode, we learn a bit more about the witches. I think the witches are coming back in the next episode. I'll be disappointed if Coral at least isn't part of the next episode. But yeah, I don't have any explanation for you because this is the first time we've seen a witch like this in Star Wars.
Yeah, and you could say maybe the closest thing, and Tormund does kind of bring it up, like Night Sisters. It's like, well,
Yeah.
no, they're not Night Sisters, but we have, oh man, Mother Talzin, right? She kind of, when she dies, just kind of becomes green smoke, and she doesn't necessarily have a physical body. So magic, that's really the only explanation, right? I wish we could spend time with like the actual thing, and I hope that is a key point with May, with Osha, like that. If you use the Force right, if you have these abilities, you can almost like strip away the fact that they're not real human beings. Like I want to see if this is something that like would have been something like Soul being in that same location would have been susceptible to, like his body kind of fragments away into that wisp, but it doesn't. We notice that one shot that we have lingering is that May kind of starts breaking up into this mist, and there's maybe like some way of like kind of coalescing these two bodies together or something like that. But that's that's new. That's something we didn't get a lot of in this episode. It's just teased. I think that is going to ultimately be crucial to the concept of what May and Osha are, for the finale to really handle. Let's hope that it's not rushed.
Yeah, that's the big thing. Hopefully it is on point next week. uh Ichijin says, as much as I've been enjoying the series, I'm actually very satisfied, but episode 8 has a lot of important things to do. Yes,
Yep.
absolutely. There are a lot of things that can go horribly wrong if they don't answer certain questions, and if we don't get season 2. Skywalker's Academy says, I'll just add that Grogu likes a good nap after using powerful abilities. The witches could be sleeping and everyone believes they're dead. Definitely agree with you on that. I don't even think the Jedi have time to really think, oh, are they dead or alive?
Yep.
I think they just see the thing blow up and they're like, okay, they must have all died. I think they're trying to get out of there and save themselves. So I think you are correct in that assessment. Ichigen511 says, heard episode 8 is called Doom. Hopefully, well, that's an interesting title. Uh, Doom, Doom, not Dume, as
Caleb
in
Doom
Caleb
finally
Doom.
has a new origin.
It's got a wolf in it. It's like the wolf is actually the Sith Lord the whole
Yeah.
time. And Dave Filoni appears as the wolf in this next episode. We'll see. Yeah, but that's a cool title. Hopefully, it lives up to it. Anthony says Grimm's fairy tales in the 1800s have witches disappear from smoke. There's plenty of witch storytellings in smoke. In fact, like you were mentioning earlier, Sonic Night Sisters, they disappear in smoke. They have green smoke. It's just we don't know the power sets of these characters, so we don't really have an explanation on how it works. We just know that they could do it. Tater
Yeah,
Tot.
and
Oh,
to be
go ahead.
fair, we don't really know how the Night Sisters magic really works to such extremes either. They just kind of do, and the only thing is that we've seen it enough times that we're just used to it. so
Right.
that whenever anything new is added on, you're like, oh, they must have used some of that green smoke and connected. Oh, there's some pot with the water of life. Okay, sure. Like that's the Night Sisters. Like, if you're gonna be upset about magic as a concept in Star Wars and ignore the fact that it is the Force just done in a very different way, um, but you're like, I want to know every detail about this magical power, then you're kind of going against the whole point of like no one really sees or knows and understands the Force in totality. It's not something to be studied by normal people. That's kind of the point.
Right. And it is something that we should learn about at least their beliefs a bit more in the next few
Yeah,
episodes. I think that'll play into their power sets. And I'm not opposed to witches in Star Wars. Star Wars has been excellent with what they've done with the witches so far. I do think we need to learn more about their power sets and how they manifest their power. What are their beliefs? How do they relate to the Sith or the dark side. The Night Sisters are very much so aligned with a lot of the beliefs of traditional dark side factions. So hopefully we see a bit more about the philosophy of these witches. And I would really like a name for them, not just witches or the coven. I'd like it to actually have a name so we could
yeah.
start calling them something besides just the witches. Tater Tot says, in my opinion, the action in this episode was fairly lackluster. Kilnaka felt sort of weak in his fight. He was hyped up too much, maybe, and I was expecting something more. I thought the scene was fine. I wouldn't say it was a life altering battle, but I did think it was good, and they used enough of like the Wookiee strength, in my opinion, to make it relatively satisfying. Like the way he is about to crush Torben's head into a wall. I think a lot of that is good. I do agree that I kind of wanted it a bit more. I wanted to see him, wreck maybe a horde of people in some ways before we see him take on these Jedi. I think there's ways they could have done it where this isn't the first time you see him fight. I would have liked to see that, but I thought this was a relatively satisfying fight. And if you want to look at it in a certain way, maybe if you think he didn't look strong enough, maybe think that he's fighting off the magic, and that's part of him is not really all in on this fight. It's like half of him battling with himself. Maybe you could use that as headcanon.
Yeah, I mean, it's fair to not love it, right? I thought it was handled pretty well. I mean, that as much as we all love Wookiees, Wookiees are hard to like get, right? Like they're characters that are just not talking in basic. That is one of their key aspects. So when that happens, right? Do we understand everything per se, their choices and all that? No, we won't ever, but like we can get it based off the characters, and that's what I'll point out again in this episode. Besides the editing, I felt like a lot of the writing, especially when involving Kilnaka as a character, was just exposition or like kind of talking and giving directions, right? That's the weakness there, and not having him be much of a character like Chewbacca often gets to be with a lot of the sequel trilogy characters, a lot of the original trilogy characters, right? So, yeah, that is the weakness there. I mean, you can write that up to being like, oh, Jedi and a very traumatic and continuously worse situation, or like trying to just do things, sure, but yeah, I mean, if we got to see the possession in his head, like how would you explain that? Right? It'd just be like, oh, it's like, okay, do I need to see Mother Anastasia do
That's
that?
pretty good.
No. Yeah, I mean, I'll be like, oh, that means one thing, and then no, it's like, yeah, maybe she could talk in basic and he does his growl, right? And he can react in certain ways, but then we'd have to use more like visuals or something, like maybe images of his family or Kashyyyk or something like that. So what we got here with the action, I'm more than happy with. I thought if you're gonna show off a Wookiee to be this powerful and destructive, and something Coral being the most menacing of this witch's coven would use, then yeah, you would use a Wookiee who can use the lightsaber and the Force and literally kicks through like walls and doors and is like clawing people. It's terrifying. It is I feel like the only other species that we know of that can be a Jedi that would be as terrifying as Trandoshans, who are
Mhm.
natural enemies of the Wookiees.
Right. Yeah, predators of the Wookiees
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, and that would be awesome to see a skier versus a Kelnaka scene. That would have been
Oh
cool.
man. Yeah.
Skywalker's Academy says Doom doesn't sound like the title I was speculating, though. Maybe because I think Soul dies in the end, and we see that seed Coral says will destroy every Jedi in the galaxy. Uh, I think Soul dies in the end too. I've thought that since the beginning, although I do think now that everything is revealed about his character, I think he is more likely fodder than he ever has been. But there is room to do something maybe a little different with him, depending on his relationship to these characters. If Osha and Man were a little bit more well defined, and a lot of their mystery wasn't still left here to be revealed, I would say could be a possibility he lives into the next season and maybe is a part of their journey. But I think now with the way he's been used in this, he's going to be a stepping stone for Osha's turn to the dark side.
Yeah, and that's where Chimera can really, really pull the strings here with Soul's confession, right? And she's already been using the helmet. We don't, we've been saying the helmet is just for her to focus in and then like get the memory or like what the events that are happening by like having the Force impressions left behind in her connection to Brendock. But I mean, there's also a great chance that this Cortosis helmet has a little extra. He's put something in there, some force object in the veins or something to corrupt her a little further, make her more susceptible, maybe get an imprint of something even worse than what we saw in this episode, right? And yeah, I think Soul, as much as like Soul Patrol loves him and everything, right? It's his biggest flaw of this whole episode is just he's like, I'm trying to do the right thing, I'm trying to do the right thing, and therefore I have to do it. And then at the end of the day, he chooses OSHA because it's convenient. It's what's best for him and all that. Like if he really, really wanted to, he could have held on and started screaming, Indara, Indara, someone help, I need help, right? Like, and I think, when you channel to the Force, when your situation's so desperate, as we've seen through EU novels and everything and all that, you can channel the Force to a much stronger degree than you've ever been able to. His his failing here is that he wanted OSHA because everything that OSHA says is working for his world point, working for the things that he's looking for here. He is selfish. I hope that there's a little bit more to the selfishness that like what makes him feel so connected to OSHA. But the biggest thing he did here that OSHA is not going to accept is that you threw away my twin sister just because you wanted me, and that you knew that was going to affect how you're going to raise me, how you're going to train me. Like part of my training as a Jedi could have been so much better if it was under Indara or anyone else in that group compared to you, because you made that choice that none of those three necessarily would have or were in the position to do so. So yeah, it makes sense for him to die. I mean, and I think you can make it a fairly honorable death where it's almost like self-sacrificing too. Like this is the wrong that I caused you. Do what you must. But that's where having character beats. That's where having discussions in this episode, in this finale, would really work if we had a little bit more peppered throughout all these episodes. And they try. I'm not gonna say they're not, but I feel like Soul's had more time to sit down to talk with May than he's had with OSHA. He's really just been trying to catch OSHA on the run or trying to catch up to OSHA. Now he's got to like almost tell everything, and it's going to feel, unfortunately, a little bit more like exposition than like a real heart to heart conversation about his flaws, about his mistake there on Brendock 16 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's gonna eventually be reality again, another heavy-handed exposition scene. But I do think that's another frustrating thing about this episode, right? Is that's like kind of an interesting idea for a Jedi, especially a Qui-Gon-esque Jedi, to be like, how do you confuse your wants and your desires for
Yeah.
what should be good and what should be right? Problem is, we don't know anything about Soul before this moment, right? We only know things about him from the future. We like Soul, but we don't know what decisions he's made in the past that have caused that struggle in him before. We only know it from a line of exposition. So if you had an episode or a season of show about Soul where you see him struggling with those decisions constantly, that would make him a more well-rounded character. Instead, you just have a line about, hey, you've struggled with this in the past. Don't do it again. I think it's inherently interesting, but it's also, unfortunately, something that falls flat because you don't see those things. And in TV and in film, again, you have to see. It's show, don't tell. You have to see the things that are important. Things that are shown are considered important in film and television rather than things that aren't. But back to the comments. And we do only have about 20-ish minutes, 25 minutes left in our stream. So if you do have a comment you're desperately wanting to get to the top, send in a super chat. We always greatly appreciate the support. We'll get your comment answered before the stream is over. If not, we're going to continue to work our way down here through the chat, and hopefully we get to yours. Ichi says, disagree. Indara is exactly what the Jedi want to be. No attachments. It's to a fault, but it's exactly what the Jedi Order is 100% about. And she is that bridge kind of character from the more spirited Jedi, like a Soul, and even in some ways a Kelnaka or Torben, to what we see in the prequels. And you see the frustrations around the council in this show that you don't necessarily see around the council in the High Republic, right? The council are very involved in the conflicts. Here they're distancing themselves from conflicts. She is kind of that bridge character. Again, want to know more about her and the relationship with these characters in the council. Hopefully we get that one day. But yeah, I see a lot of what they're doing with Indara. And it might be kind of one of the reasons I like Indara is because she feels classically prequel.
Yeah, and I mean, if we get the full truth revealed to the Jedi, we know that Vernestra's still in the story. That she's gonna definitely go to Brendok at some point. Um, if whatever evidence you can gather, whatever maybe like a dying soul tells her, or whatever maybe like an Osha says before she chooses to go off and like kind of hides her full corruption or something, would give a lot of respect to Indara of like, yeah, she was ultimately just doing her mission and she kept that as her focus when everyone else around her, bar maybe Kilnaka, wasn't, right? And I think that's going to be something that could be an inspiration for a lot of these Jedi. Like we've let these High Republic Jedi philosophies of like trusting yourself, accepting all your emotions and passions, and ultimately doing what's best and being unified and feeling everyone's presence. That's starting to hurt us because maybe the Nile conflict as it ultimately ends fundamentally alters a lot of Jedi, maybe leaves some of these heroes that we followed for so long in a very like bad position, or like ultimately things that are not in line with the Jedi. And instead of being there to like help understand future generations of why they acted this way and why they would still be good Jedi, we see people who don't necessarily get the full picture of them, and that continues into the cycle of like, okay, the institution is just going to recycle and let these things happen, become imprints onto all these younger characters who then imprint their own understanding and their own experiences. It's like, in a way, like a slow moving trauma for the Jedi of not understanding some of our philosophy doesn't make sense for us, and the ones that fit best are turning into more of these monk-like ones, and some of them who don't are turning into these wild cards who either leave the order or killed, or end up becoming people hidden away in the system, but are ultimately weakening us from our original goals, right? Like there is a lot that Indar's character represents, and I truly do think Carrie Ann Moss's performance is informing here. We just need more time for all of these episodes.
Anthony says, I wonder if it was Osha's desire clouding Soul's mind. It reminds me of Kamir saying that it was Osha's strength in the Force. Osha's desire clouding Soul's mind. So her desire to want to be a Jedi, which, again, not to harp on another thing that I feel like is missing, but the witches train them to think that the Jedi are evil. We still got no explanation for why Osha really wants to be a Jedi. If they can kind of come up with maybe there's the connection in the Vergence is pulling her towards Soul. I think that's an interesting idea, Anthony. Like maybe her desire to become a Jedi only appears after Soul it gets near her. I think that's a way to connect them and make it a little less strange that out of nowhere she's like, I want to leave my family, the only family I've ever known, and my twin sister, and go be a Jedi when she's only taught that the Jedi are evil. So I kind of like that. I kind of like if there's that connection there that makes both of them feel completely and utterly attached to each other.
Yeah, and that's where having the Virgins be shown, be almost its own character, can really strengthen and land the finale for a lot of the plot points that are started here in a very strong step, but are not completed in the way that we're expecting.
Ichigen said, I was happy with the Kalnaka and the Acolyte fight. You can tell he's a badass. Didn't need to see it. Happy to have it implied. Yeah, glad you enjoyed the fight. Rick M says, emotional attachment's not a Jedi trait. Also says unless Kelnaka was resisting a little, a Wookiee would have destroyed them. Like I said earlier, maybe he was resisting a bit, trying to get out of the mind control. Ichi says, exactly, this is my problem with the Jedi. It's always been the problem with every Jedi ever. Attachments cause problems. It's why the Jedi can never be successful. And it's why they fight that eternal fight between the light side and the dark. It's ultra possessiveness of the dark versus the kind of complete abstinence of a possession in the light. It's an eternal battle that one will never be fully right or fully wrong. But yeah, it's always
Absolutely.
interesting to see.
Absolutely. And even if you're like a full EU fan, let's just look at what happens. Eventually, New Jedi Order happens, the Vong threat occurs. These passionate Jedi who oftentimes come from long running families who survived Order 66 or, have had excuses made for them like Kip Duron where he's destroyed entire solar systems, right? Um, Even though they're under someone so empathetic as Luke, his own family ends up resulting in another Sith, and that happens in canon for sure, right? But it's curious to see that like even on that spectrum of like he's going to be accepting, have families, marriages, the working with your enemies, scoundrels, all this and that, things can still go wrong, right? That is the eternal struggle of like following a philosophy, because philosophy is only what like people have given to you or what you've taken from your experiences. It's never going to be 100%. And that's where the struggle of the Jedi becoming more and more institutionalized, more and more of like a policing force for the Senate, instead of being like those explorers that are like setting up new stations and trying to connect the galaxy. That is a big part of like the earlier High Republic focus before the Great Hyperspace Disaster. How they don't react to their changing situations and how their philosophy is only forced by extreme situations to change. That is like, that is a really interesting thing to consider. So, yeah, attachment, even if you accept them, even if you don't, it's very interesting to see that Star Wars writers and creators have been like, it sucks both ways because the Jedi are never going to be perfect about it.
Rick M says they should change their creed not to have attachments is an attachment. Die hard Star Wars fan here. I agree. It does have great life lessons. Uh, not to have attachments is an attachment. I understand what you're saying. It's the attachment to a creed, a philosophy. Then, but if you don't have a backbone to your beliefs, then it's chaos. So, I think the Jedi, their heart's in the right place. That's always been what this is about. Their heart's in the right place. What they're trying to do is it's morally correct, but it's the control element that leads them astray. It's the power element that leads them astray, and it's ultimately how they try to use their power to overstretch themselves is kind of what leads them to make compromises in their beliefs, and that's what we see throughout the films.
Yeah, totally agree.
Josh Morgenstern says, really wondering if Disney would fire Leslie Headland then hire a better writer. There is no conviction from any of the characters. Really, they flip on a dime. I We're not like an all caps channel like this comment, but I don't disagree with you. Not about firing Leslie Headland. I don't think they won't fire her. She's a freelancer, working on a project, right? So they can't fire her. The only thing they would do would be say she's not working on season 2, but I do think the Acolyte is part of her story. They wouldn't just ditch her because this is a story she pitched, right? So I don't agree about that part, but I do agree that the characters flip on a dime. There's not much really to the backbone of any of these characters. They just seem to do whatever is convenient for the plot, and it's been one of the most frustrating things about this show, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I don't fully agree with that, but I will say that it does really feel like that because this is such a short episode by episode show. You can look at all these other live action shows that have had more episodes, like in the case of Andor, or they've had longer episodes when the plot is very important to follow and chase around, and the action doesn't necessarily have to take a huge emphasis in the story and what's being shown in the season, right? So you could argue that that comes with the fact that a Mandalorian oftentimes is just like playing with your toys, and a lot of it is fetch quests. Like that is a fact. It's not like something phenomenal story wise. But if this is like a first step towards like kind of taking more like an HBO level way of like looking at your characters and depth of it, I mean, I see all the elements there. I really do. But then why don't you give them a longer time? You've proven you can do that with Andor, right? And even if this ultimately has to be like a 6-hour film, I mean, then give us like a couple more episodes there. Just do that if you want to keep everything short here, because then naturally writers would be able to stretch it out. It really does feel like, and this is my opinion, of course, that Leslie wanted to keep everything possible from her original ideas, her original scripts, and then what she had to sacrifice was having very like weak editing, very quick cuts for everything she wanted to put into here because she wanted the stuff as much as possible, right? It's almost like the opposite of like a show like Rings of Power, where it's like we're gonna spend 2 episodes doing absolutely nothing. This show is a show that so much happens every episode, but you're like, can we react to that? Can we let that sink in? Can we connect all these things that are happening? And the answer is like, we will. It'll just be like while we're also running to the next thing, and I think that is the biggest struggle here because man, you stretch these out to 50 minutes, I think you can make some really, really strong character beats because the skeleton's here. There's just no flesh a lot of times.
No, definitely. And I think that's just continues to add to my number one word with the show is frustrating. And it is because you see the parts that could make an interesting whole. It has just mostly been that the whole seems to dodge those things in favor of other decisions that don't seem right for the structure or for this narrative. We do have another super chat from Anthony. Thank you so much again, Anthony. Your support means the world to us, and it's just a line from Revenge of the Sith, but one of the most powerful lines from the novel. Dark is generous, it is patient and always wins, but one lone candle is enough to fight it back. Love is more than a candle. Love can ignite the stars. And it is the foundation of the light side of the Force. It is truly at the heart of it is love. And I think that's what you see a lot in the High Republic recently. If you've read Temptation of the Force, it's one of the fundamental pieces of that book. And I think one of the things that works really well in that book, and it is something that carries into the EU as well. I do think that Luke becomes a better Jedi when he loves somebody, when he has somebody to fall back on and believe in. I think it grounds you, and it is something that I would love to see come back to Star Wars. That idea of having not necessarily attachment a part of the Jedi code, but something beyond attachment. You know, this ability to channel the most pure form of the light through love. I think it is something that's very interesting. It's been in kind of the fabric of all EU and then now High Republic era Star Wars storytelling. And it's something I've always thought was really interesting. Now, it is not something that was ever a part of George Lucas's lore for Star Wars. I think that's very fair, but I think also George Lucas is trying to say that the Jedi aren't doing it right in the prequels. So it's not necessarily something that you should only look at what he does with the Jedi in the prequels. When you make a prequel or a show, of course, that's what you should be looking at. But when you move beyond or move ahead, I think there are layers there that you can explore.
Yeah, well said. I mean, if we're gonna say that Star Wars is only what George Lucas said, well, then we're kind of ignoring the fact that he was a creative, like the brain trust for episode 5 and 6. As far as like the product of the film, no, he wrote some things, but look what happens with the prequels. As much as like we're of the generation that loves the prequels, objectively, episode 5 is a masterpiece that Lucas did not direct. And objectively, a lot of the people that he wanted to keep him in check with his ideas, who would have, really kept him focused for the prequels, would have brought out the best of what he was trying to say, weren't there, right? So it's also a matter of like translation of your ideas, right? George Lucas has those maybe the beginnings, the sparks of what's being said here in this line, but he doesn't always explore it, right? And maybe that's where other writers can, other writers who see what he's trying to get at, or maybe are inspired by what he's trying to do here in the prequels, right? Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting food for thought.
Absolutely. Anthony says, for me, it added layers to May, makes her much more sympathetic. If you're talking about the episode, I disagree, but I'm glad you got whatever you got out of it for May. I think I understand the sympathy around her, watching her mother die for sure and hating Soul, but I already kind of felt like she had justification to hate Soul no matter what was the reason for her descent into the dark side. but I disagree that I agree that it makes more sympathetic, but I don't think it added much for the layers of May. I don't think she has much layers. She hasn't seemed to pick a path or have any actual ideology in this show.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I think I'm sympathetic that everyone used her, right? Like either wanted to throw her away or were like, okay, let's just use her for her our own ill intentions. But the moments that she can be herself, like when she's talking about the ascension ceremony and all that, she's just truly like a very excited child about like being important, about being valued. And then she's quite literally thrown into a hole and chosen, not chosen over in favor of Osha at the end. And I have sympathy for that. But that's also just looking at more of the structure than what her character is doing and feeling, right? And again, that's what we've been saying about every time on these streams. Like, it's there. It's just not like the focus ever.
Kajeb5 says, seems like Indara was purposely not explaining stuff to Torben to train him. He probably got fed up after 7 weeks of just doing mundane recon, but that's perfect to train his mind. That's fair. And I think it is a point that she says in this episode that she doesn't reveal things to her Padawan for a specific reason. Um, but I do feel like it is conveniently placed into this episode just to have that plot point kind of emerge. Um, to explain all of the other stuff that we have to know as an audience when he's just kind of not he hasn't asked these questions for 7 weeks. He hasn't sat there and thought about this has never come up while they've sat around the fire. I think it strikes even more how frustratingly exposition heavy that scene is when nothing else happens in the scene besides all the explanation you need for why they're there. Nothing else happens, then they move on to the next scene.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm in agreement. I think again works for her philosophy. She does say that to souls, like this is why you don't have a bad one and I do, right? But yeah, I mean, again, these are 3 and 7 are the longest episodes of the show so far, and yet they should have been even longer, right? Just to really make us feel bad for Torben or like see why he's so susceptible, right? Why he has a tear going down. Like what is it about Coruscant that he's missing so hard? What is it about him as a character that can't stand that he's doing this whole Mr. Miyagi sequence of like just picking up grass and analyzing it for why it's so vital, right? Like we see that he's not enjoying himself, but no one necessarily is. It's just that's what they're tasked with doing. But what makes him so susceptible? Is it just his youth? So, like again, those are questions raised, and the show's not interested in answering them.
Last couple, and then we're going to have to wrap it up here after the last couple we read here. Anthony says, that's fine, Liam. I respect your opinion, but remember, opinions are not objective. I never said opinions are objective. I feel like I've said the opposite like 50 times on these streams. I'm just saying my strong opinion about why I don't like a lot of elements of the show. So you can take it how you will. Again, you're not wrong for thinking your thoughts on this show, but I'm not wrong for thinking mine. So that's the point. Kajeb5 says those witches definitely died due to forced backlash. Possibly. I just think we don't really. I feel like it would be more emphasized that they're dead if they died. They kind of all just fall back. It's not. It's not really a big thing in this episode, the big reveal episode, right? It's more. It's more focused on the previous episode where it's supposed to maybe be a red herring. In this episode, they just kind of walk by them and ignore it. I feel like that's something big to show, right? For them not to ever get cut down, for them not to ever have any actual direct violence done to them. I think that's big for what they're planning for the future of these witches.
Yeah, that's hopefully something a little bit more explored. I mean, if they're dead, we're gonna see their skeletons at this point. It's 16 years, um, but yeah, I mean, Coral, she's the wild card here too, and she could be a pretty easy way of explaining it without having to do huge exposition jumps, especially since she's the one using like the whole possession tactic on Kelnaka, right? Um, but again, they're all like kind of stored in this common room. Like, for what reason is she the one channeling them, and then the connection that is broken there is what's actually causing. She just like kind of passes it on to them, and that's what's the force backlash. We need to see some more of this stuff, man. It's just a fact.
Definitely. And that's going to wrap up our stream for tonight for everybody. So thank you so much for joining us, everybody, for our first stream since 10K. We really appreciate all the support you guys have shown us all night and across these last 3 years or so since we started this channel. It's been amazing, such a fun ride, and we can't wait to keep going to get to 20K, 50K, 100K. Let's keep it going. Hopefully we make this a place for everybody to enjoy and appreciate their own opinions about Star Wars and just have fun with the franchise. So thank you so much for watching. Keep an eye out for our last predictions video, which will go up this weekend, and then next week will be our final Acolyte stream. So hopefully you guys all join us for all of that. Thank you so much for watching this video, and we will see you guys all next time. Good night, everybody.